Texas was a place where loyalty and justice ran deep. In a small town just outside of Austin, Sheriff Amanda Carter was a respected woman. She wore her badge with pride, standing as a symbol of law and order in a town that trusted her completely. But on one fateful night, the sheriff became a killer. The 911 call came in at exactly 2:13 a.m. The dispatcher, a young woman named Lisa, answered with her usual calm voice. 911, what's your emergency? A frantic female voice gasped on the other end. There's been a shooting. 504 Maple Drive. Hurry, please. Lisa could hear heavy breathing, panic, and then silence. The line went dead. Deputy Ryan Baker was the first officer on the scene. He arrived within minutes, his patrol car screeching to a stop in front of the modest two-story home. The porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows over the front yard. The front door was wide open. Baker cautiously stepped inside, his gun drawn. The air smelled of gunpowder and something metallic, blood. The living room was a mess. A coffee table was overturned, shattered glass everywhere. On the floor near the staircase lay a man in his 40s, his lifeless body riddled with bullets. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the hardwood floor. Baker recognized him instantly. Detective Mark Carter, Sheriff Amanda Carter's husband. And standing over him, gun still in hand, was Amanda herself. Her uniform was stained with blood, her eyes blank. Her hands trembled, yet she didn't drop the weapon. Baker hesitated before stepping forward. Amanda, he said cautiously. She turned to him slowly, as if waking from a trance. Then, as if realizing what she had done, she collapsed to her knees and let out a scream that echoed through the house. Within minutes, the entire street was filled with red and blue lights. Officers poured into the house, securing the scene, taking pictures, and collecting evidence. The coroner confirmed what was already obvious. Mark Carter had been shot 10 times at close range. Sheriff Amanda Carter, the town's most trusted lawwoman, was arrested on the spot. But something about the crime didn't sit right with Detective Daniel Reyes, a seasoned investigator who had seen it all. He stood outside watching as Amanda was placed into the back of a police car. Her face was pale, her eyes distant. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't just shock. There was rage beneath the surface. And Reyes knew without a doubt that there was more to this case than a wife snapping in anger. The morning after the shooting, the town of Cedar Grove was in shock. News spread like wildfire. Sheriff Amanda Carter had killed her husband. Some whispered about an affair gone wrong. Others speculated about self-defense. But no one knew the real story. Detective Daniel Reyes sat at his desk, staring at the case file. The details didn't add up. A crime of passion? Maybe. But 10 shots? That wasn't just anger. That was something deeper. The interview room at the Cedar Grove Police Department was cold and sterile. Amanda Carter sat in the metal chair, her hands cuffed to the table. She wore an orange jumpsuit now, her badge and uniform taken from her. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes carried a storm. Reyes walked in, setting a cup of black coffee in front of her. Sheriff, he greeted, sitting across from her. She didn't respond. You shot your husband 10 times. Why? Amanda took a deep breath and finally looked up. He was hurting my daughter, she said, her voice shaking. Reyes felt his stomach drop. He had worked in law enforcement for over 2 decades, but nothing prepared him for those words. What do you mean? He asked carefully. Amanda clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. I came home early last night. I was supposed to be working a late shift, but I wasn't feeling well. When I walked in, I saw him. Reyes didn't interrupt. He let her continue. He was in our daughter's room. My baby, my 10-year-old little girl. Amanda's voice cracked and her eyes filled with tears. She has Down syndrome, detective. She trusts everyone. She didn't understand what was happening. Reyes felt his jaw tighten. What did you do? I pulled my gun, Amanda said. I told him to get away from her. He turned around and looked at me like I was the crazy one, like I was the one who had done something wrong. She exhaled sharply, then whispered, I didn't even think. I just pulled the trigger. Reyes could picture the scene. A mother walking in on the unthinkable. A trained officer reacting with instinct. 10 bullets. Why didn't you call 911 yourself? Reyes asked. Amanda let out a bitter laugh. And say what? Hi, I'm the sheriff, and I just killed my husband? Who would believe me? Who would believe that Detective Mark Carter, the town's beloved officer, was a monster? Reyes leaned back in his chair. The case had taken a dark turn. This wasn't just a murder. It was a mother's revenge. But something was still off. Why did you shoot him 10 times? Amanda's expression hardened. Because after the first shot, he was still breathing. Reyes sat in silence. He had investigated hundreds of homicides, but this was different. This was raw. This was justice, but carried out by the wrong hands. And now Amanda Carter was facing life in prison. But the case wasn't over yet, because there was still one witness. And that witness was a 10-year-old girl. Detective Daniel Reyes stood outside room 304 of Cedar Grove General Hospital. His heart was heavier than usual. Behind that door was Mia Carter, the 10-year-old girl who had seen everything. He took a deep breath before stepping inside. The room was small and quiet, the only sound coming from the beeping heart monitor beside the bed. Mia sat upright, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Her dark curls framed her round face, and her big brown eyes looked up at Reyes with innocent curiosity. Beside her sat Dr. Evelyn Brooks, the hospital's child psychologist. She gave Reyes a small nod, silently telling him to be gentle. Hi, Mia, Reyes said, pulling up a chair. Mia didn't say anything. She just hugged her rabbit tighter. I'm Detective Reyes, he continued, keeping his voice soft. I work with your mommy. I just want to talk to you, sweetheart. Is that okay? Mia blinked a few times, then nodded slowly. Reyes took a deep breath. He had interviewed many witnesses before. Hardened criminals, scared victims, even children. But this was different. This was a little girl who had been betrayed by the one person meant to protect her. Mia, he said carefully, can you tell me what happened that night? Mia lowered her gaze, her fingers nervously playing with the rabbit's ear. Daddy, he was in my room, she whispered. Reyes felt his chest tighten. And what was he doing? Mia hesitated. He said we were playing a game, she finally said. Her voice was small, barely audible. But I didn't like the game. Dr. Brooks gently squeezed Mia's hand. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. Mia looked at Reyes again. Then Mommy came in, she continued. She looked really mad. She yelled at Daddy. Reyes nodded. What did Daddy do? Mia's lips trembled. He said Mommy was being silly, that I was just dreaming. But I wasn't. Her small fingers gripped the rabbit tighter. Reyes felt rage bubbling inside him. He kept his expression calm, but inside he wanted to break something. Then what happened, Mia? Mia's eyes filled with tears. Mommy pulled out her gun. She told Daddy to get away. Her voice shook. Daddy got really mad. He started walking toward Mommy. Reyes leaned in. Did he hurt her? Mia nodded quickly. He grabbed her arm. He said she was overreacting. Then, she hiccuped, struggling to speak. Then Mommy shot him. The room fell into silence. Reyes exhaled. Do you remember how many times? Mia thought for a moment, then held up her small hands. 10 fingers. Reyes looked at Dr. Brooks, who gave him a knowing glance. This wasn't just self-defense. Amanda Carter had snapped. Thank you, Mia, Reyes said softly. You were very brave. Mia wiped her nose on her sleeve. Is Mommy in trouble? Reyes hesitated. He didn't want to lie. She did something very serious, sweetheart, but she did it because she loves you. Mia's bottom lip trembled. I don't want her to go away. Reyes felt his throat tighten. This case was more complicated than ever, because now he had to answer one crucial question. Was Amanda Carter a murderer, or was she just a mother protecting her child? One thing was certain. This wasn't over yet, and the town of Cedar Grove wasn't ready for the truth. Detective Daniel Reyes pulled up to the Carter residence just as the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet Texas neighborhood. The house was a 2-story brick home, its neatly trimmed lawn now ruined by yellow police tape crisscrossing the front yard. The scene had been cleared, but the echoes of violence still lingered in the air. Reyes stepped out of his car, adjusting his badge as he approached Officer Kelly Monroe, one of the first responders. She was standing near the front porch, flipping through her notepad. "Reyes," she greeted, her voice tired. "I was wondering when you'd come by. I needed to talk to the girl first," Reyes replied. "Now I need to see exactly what went down here." Kelly sighed and let him inside. The living room was pristine, not a thing out of place, except for the dark stain on the carpet. Dried blood. Reyes crouched down near the stain. "This is where the body fell?" Kelly nodded. "Yep. Tyler Carter. Shot 10 times." Reyes ran a hand over his chin. "That's, overkill." "Tell me about it," Kelly muttered. "CSI recovered all 10 casings near the hallway entrance. Amanda Carter stood right there." She pointed to a spot near the stairs. Reyes stood and imagined the scene. Tyler Carter standing near the couch, probably furious. Amanda Carter, her gun drawn, her hands shaking. Mia Carter, watching in horror. "Did the daughter witness everything?" Kelly asked, as if reading his mind. Reyes nodded. "Yeah. She said her dad grabbed Amanda's arm before the first shot." Kelly whistled low. "That matches the autopsy. First bullet hit him in the shoulder. The others? Chest, stomach, and one in the head. Execution style." Reyes's stomach churned. So at some point, Amanda stopped defending herself and started making sure he was dead. Exactly. Reyes turned toward the hallway. The walls were clean. No bullet holes, no stray shots. Every single bullet had hit its mark. He turned to Kelly. "Amanda's a trained sheriff. She doesn't miss. Which means..." "She meant every shot," Kelly finished. A heavy silence settled between them. Reyes sighed. "What about Tyler? Any signs of a struggle?" Kelly shook her head. "No bruises, no defensive wounds. Just 10 bullet holes." Reyes frowned. "Then why didn't he fight back?" That question sat heavily in the air. If Tyler Carter was attacking his daughter, wouldn't he have fought for his life when his wife pulled a gun on him? Or had he truly believed Amanda wouldn't pull the trigger? Reyes exhaled. Something still wasn't adding up. Just then, Officer Dante Lawson entered, holding a tablet. "Detective, you need to see this." He handed Reyes the tablet. It was a forensic report, the gunshot residue test. Reyes's eyes scanned the results, and then stopped cold. His heart pounded. "This can't be right." Kelly peeked over his shoulder. "What? What is it?" Reyes turned to her, his expression dark. "The gunpowder residue on Amanda's hands? It's light. So? So if she fired 10 shots at close range, there should be a lot more." Kelly blinked. "Are you saying..." "I'm saying," Reyes interrupted, "there's a chance she didn't fire all the shots." The room felt colder. If Amanda Carter hadn't fired every bullet, that meant someone else had. And if someone else had fired the fatal shot to Tyler Carter's head, then this case was far from solved. Detective Daniel Reyes sat in his car outside the crime lab, staring at the forensic report again. The inconsistency with the gunshot residue bothered him. If Amanda Carter fired 10 rounds, she should have had a heavy layer of residue on her hands. But the report suggested otherwise. He grabbed his phone and dialed Dr. Elaine Porter, the chief forensic analyst. "Detective Reyes," she answered. "I was expecting your call. I need clarity on the residue test," Reyes said, skipping the pleasantries. "Amanda Carter shot her husband 10 times, but the test says otherwise." Elaine sighed. "It's strange, I know. We found gunpowder on her hands, but not in the amount you'd expect for 10 shots. It's possible she fired some rounds, but not all." Reyes tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Could she have washed her hands afterward?" "No chance. The officers arrived too fast, and even if she did, we'd still detect more traces in the creases of her fingers." Reyes ran a hand through his hair. "So someone else fired that gun." "It's a possibility," Elaine said carefully. "Or she wore gloves for most of the shots and removed them for the last few." Reyes froze. Gloves. The crime scene photos flashed in his mind. Amanda Carter had been wearing her sheriff's uniform when arrested. No gloves, and none were found at the scene. But what if she wasn't alone when the shooting happened? Reyes returned to the house where forensic officers were still combing through evidence. He walked into the master bedroom. The bed was unmade, the closet door ajar. He spotted something that had been overlooked before, a drawer left open. Inside, he found a black pair of leather gloves. "Damn it," he muttered. He pulled out a glove and examined it. He had a gut feeling. "Hey, Reyes," Officer Dante Lawson called from the hallway. "You need to see this." Reyes followed him to the home office. The forensics team had unlocked Tyler Carter's laptop. Lawson pointed to the screen. "Emails. Lots of them." Reyes scanned the messages, his jaw tightening. Tyler had been communicating with someone for months. One name kept appearing: Zoe Reynolds. Reyes didn't recognize the name, but something about it set off alarms in his head. "What do we know about her?" he asked. Lawson checked his notes. "She's a deputy at Amanda's precinct." Reyes exhaled sharply. "You're telling me Amanda's husband was having an affair with one of her own deputies?" Lawson nodded grimly. "Looks like it." Reyes sat back. If Zoe Reynolds was involved with Tyler, could she have been in the house that night? And more importantly, could she have fired the shots Amanda didn't? Reyes wasted no time. He drove straight to the sheriff's department, where Zoe Reynolds was on duty. She was a tall, athletic woman with sharp blue eyes and an air of confidence. She barely flinched when Reyes approached her. "Detective, what can I do for you? I need to talk to you about Tyler Carter." Her jaw clenched slightly. "What about him?" Reyes studied her reaction. "We found emails between you two." Zoe crossed her arms. "That's none of your business." Reyes took a step closer. "It became my business when he ended up shot 10 times in his own living room." She scoffed. "Amanda shot him. You already have your killer." Reyes smiled coldly. "See, that's the thing. Forensics is telling me she didn't fire all the shots." Zoe's expression flickered. Just for a second, but Reyes caught it. "You were there, weren't you?" he pressed. Zoe stepped back, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Reyes took a deep breath. "Where were you on the night of the murder?" "At home," she said quickly. Reyes smirked. Too quick, too defensive. He nodded to Officer Kelly Monroe, who had been watching from a distance. "Take her in for questioning." Zoe's face went pale. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," Reyes said, "because I think Amanda Carter pulled the trigger in rage. But you pulled it to make sure he stayed dead." As Kelly led her away, Reyes felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting into place. Now he just had to prove it. Detective Daniel Reyes sat across from Zoe Reynolds in the dimly lit interrogation room. She wore her deputy's uniform, but there was a shift in her demeanor. Her confidence had cracked, and her fingers tapped anxiously on the table. Reyes leaned forward, voice calm but firm. "Zoe, I know you were in the Carter house that night." She scoffed. "You don't have proof." Reyes slid a folder across the table. "Actually, I do." Zoe hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were two key pieces of evidence: the forensic report showing that Amanda Carter didn't fire all 10 rounds, the black leather gloves found in the bedroom, gunpowder residue still fresh on them. Zoe swallowed hard. "That doesn't prove anything." Reyes smirked. "It proves more than you think. Those gloves were tested for DNA. Guess whose skin cells we found inside?" Zoe's eyes darted to the door, then back to Reyes. She was cornered. "Sit back, Zoe," Reyes said. "Let's go over what really happened." Reyes paced the room, reconstructing the timeline. Amanda came home that night and found Tyler in their daughter's room. She lost control, grabbed her gun, and fired. But she wasn't the only one there. Zoe clenched her jaw. "You don't know what you're talking about." Reyes ignored her. "You were already in the house," he continued. "Maybe you were meeting him there. Maybe you walked in on the same scene Amanda did. Either way, you weren't leaving without making sure he was dead." Zoe's breath hitched. "She fired first. Maybe once, maybe twice. But then you took the gun. You finished it. 10 bullets in total." Reyes leaned down, meeting her gaze. "That's why Amanda's hands didn't have enough gunpowder residue. You helped her, and then you both covered it up." Zoe stared at him, her breathing uneven. Reyes sat back down. "Here's the thing. Amanda might have had a reason to snap. But you? You had a motive. Silence." Then Zoe exhaled shakily. "You think I planned this?" Reyes nodded. "Yes. I think you and Tyler had a relationship. But maybe you weren't just his side piece. Maybe you wanted more." Zoe's lip trembled. "I think you hated Amanda," Reyes continued. Maybe you convinced yourself that Tyler would leave her for you, but when she found out, everything fell apart. Zoe's eyes glistened, her walls crumbling. He wasn't leaving her, was he? Reyes pressed. He was using you. Tears slipped down Zoe's cheeks. Reyes sat back. Now he had her. You loved him, he said softly. And when you realized he wasn't yours, you made sure no one else would have him either. Zoe let out a shaky breath. She stopped herself. Reyes let the silence stretch. He could hear her breathing, could see the weight of her secrets crushing her. Finally, she whispered, he promised me. Reyes nodded, his voice steady. But he lied. Zoe looked up at him, her face twisted in grief. And then she said the words that sealed her fate. I didn't mean to kill him. Zoe's voice broke as she spoke. I loved him, but I hated him too, she admitted. When Amanda shot him, I just took the gun. I don't even remember pulling the trigger. Reyes sighed. He had seen many crimes of passion, but this one was different. Amanda Carter had snapped in a moment of rage. But Zoe? Zoe had made a choice. Reyes stood. You're under arrest for murder. Zoe didn't resist as Officer Kelly Monroe walked in to cuff her. As they led her away, Reyes exhaled. There was only one loose end left, Amanda. She was still in custody, but now the case had changed. The DA would have to decide if she was a killer or just a woman who had lost everything. Either way, her life would never be the same. The courtroom was silent as Amanda Carter walked in, shackled at the wrists. The once proud wife of Sheriff Tyler Carter now looked like a shadow of herself, her face pale, her body tense. Detective Daniel Reyes sat in the gallery, watching as the prosecution and defense prepared for one of the most controversial trials the county had ever seen. Amanda Carter versus the state of Texas. Would the jury see her as a grieving mother who had acted in rage, or a murderer who deserved to spend the rest of her life behind bars? The district attorney, Clayton Pierce, wasted no time painting Amanda as a cold-blooded killer. She found her husband in an unforgivable situation, Pierce said, pacing in front of the jury. But instead of calling the police, she took justice into her own hands. He pointed to the forensic evidence on display. Gunshot residue on Amanda's hands. The autopsy report confirming 10 bullets fired. The chilling 911 call where Amanda admitted, I shot him. She executed her husband, Pierce continued, not in self-defense, not in the heat of passion, but in cold rage. Amanda's attorney, Lisa Caldwell, stood to counter. She was a mother, Caldwell said, her voice firm. She walked in on a scene no mother should ever witness. She didn't plan this. She reacted. Caldwell wasn't trying to prove Amanda innocent. That would be impossible. Instead, she was fighting for a lesser charge, something that wouldn't send Amanda away for life. The case had one major twist left. Zoe Reynolds. She was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, now facing her own murder charge. Ms. Reynolds, Pierce began, tell the court about that night. Zoe's hands trembled as she gripped the microphone. I was in love with Tyler, she admitted, eyes glossy with tears. I thought he loved me too. But that night, I saw who he really was. She described walking in, seeing Amanda scream and grabbing the gun. I fired, Zoe whispered. Not Amanda. Mr. Gasps filled the courtroom. Amanda stiffened in her seat, staring at Zoe in shock. She's lying, Pierce shouted. She's trying to save Amanda. But Reyes knew the truth. She wasn't lying. And that changed everything. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The judge, a stern-faced woman with piercing gray eyes, asked Amanda to stand. The courtroom held its breath. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant not guilty. Amanda collapsed in relief, tears streaming down her face. But the verdict wasn't over. On the charge of voluntary manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty. A murmur spread through the crowd. The judge sighed. Amanda Carter, you are sentenced to 10 years in prison. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't life. Amanda closed her eyes, accepting her fate. Months later, Reyes visited Amanda in prison. You should have gotten less time, he admitted. Amanda smiled sadly. I killed him, Reyes. I had to pay for that. And Zoe? Reyes asked. Amanda's expression darkened. She deserved worse. Zoe, now serving 25 years, had been the real killer in the end, but Amanda had fired first. That was enough to cost her a decade of her life. As Reyes left the prison, he thought about the case. An open marriage, a hidden affair, a crime that never should have happened. But now it was finally over.